Welcome to the Art Deep Dive.
Hmm.
Today we're diving deep into the extraordinary world of Jung Gi, uh, the late comic book artist whose, wow, mind-blowing ability to conjure incredibly detailed, sprawling scenes entirely from memory just captivated the global art community.
It really did, and we have a rich collection of material to explore today. There's news report detailing his passing and touching on his unique gifts, a couple of insightful interviews where he discusses his artistic journey and his philosophies,
Right.
and also a fascinating YouTube analysis that really dissects his techniques.
So our mission on this deep dive is to really try and understand how Jung Gi developed this, seemingly superhuman skill. We want to unpack his unique perspective on learning to draw, explore the methods he actually used, and of course, reflect on the profound loss felt by the art world with his untimely passing at just 47 years old. We're aiming to go beyond just admiring his art, and truly understand the man behind the pen.
Absolutely, and I'm ready to navigate these sources with you. Okay, so let's begin by looking at the very beginnings. Jung Gi's passion for drawing, it ignited really early, around age 6, apparently.
6, wow.
Yeah, he encountered Akira Toriyama's Dr. Slump, and that single sketchbook illustration, it just sparked this lifelong fire. He drew constantly from that moment on.
That's remarkable,
Yeah.
especially considering his parents initially had maybe different expectations, for their eldest child.
Right, they weren't necessarily encouraging the art path at first.
But that spark from Dr. Slump was just so powerful, it fueled his constant drawing anyway.
And it's interesting to consider how that lack of formal art training in those really early years actually shaped his development. He essentially taught himself perspective.
Just by looking.
Just by keenly observing the world around him. He even recalled recognizing basic perspective, the way lines converge to create depth in his kindergarten drawings.
No way.
Ah.
Before he knew the theory.
Long before he knew the formal terms for it. It just shows, fundamentally, you can grasp these principles through dedicated observation, even without that formal instruction.
That's incredible. And this self-directed learning, it didn't stop at the basics, did it?
Yeah.
He went on to develop his own distinctive fisheye, or 5-point perspective.
That's right.
So this fisheye thing, is that like seeing the world through a really wide lens, sort of distorting the edges to fit more in? Is that the idea?
That's a pretty good analogy, yeah. It was born from his own creative urge, his desire to include as much as possible within a single scene, rather than sticking strictly to traditional perspective rules. He actually described it as something created out of my ego, to include as much as possible on a single scene, which really illustrates his innovative approach, doesn't it?
It really does. It's fascinating that this self-taught approach highlights his innate curiosity and his drive to capture the world his own way, not constrained by the rule book.
And even later, when he did eventually start taking art classes in high school, his foundational approach, that incredible ability to draw from memory, it was already deeply ingrained.
So the classes came later, but the core skill was already there.
Exactly. And he always emphasized the constant collection of visual information through just keen observation. He wasn't like sitting there with photographic references while drawing.
Right.
Instead, he habitually studied all sorts of images across different genres, constantly building this immense mental visual library.
He believed visualizing the moment was absolutely key, sort of blending his everyday observations with the power of his imagination.
And that was core to his teaching later on, too, when he taught manhwa.
He mentioned something about needing only about 60% of the detail to recreate a recognizable image, that it wasn't photographic recall.
Exactly. It wasn't about perfect recall, but capturing the essence, the key elements of a subject.
Gotcha. And this ability is drawing complex scenes from memory.
Right.
It wasn't something he consciously developed as a specific technique early on.
Apparently not. His drawings were just always rooted in things he'd actually seen or heard. It was just his natural way of processing the world visually. He only realized later, that his method was quite different from how many other artists worked.
There's that really telling story from his military service, too.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, to avoid constant requests to draw for his superiors, he deliberately hid his artistic talents.
Yeah, okay.
But instead of just stopping his artistic development altogether, he mentally absorbed everything around him, the equipment, the uniforms, the layouts of the base.
So he was drawing it all in his head.
Essentially, yeah, drawing them in his mind. it really underscores the power of that internal visualization in his development.
Yeah.
It wasn't solely reliant on pen on paper. His mind was constantly working.
That's fascinating. He had a very insightful way of describing his mental prep before drawing, too. This idea of creating a mini-me.
Right, the mini-me. Tell us about that.
Well, he talked about this mini-me that would virtually navigate the space he wanted to depict. It allowed him to find the most compelling perspective, the best angle, the right composition.
Like a little avatar scouting the scene.
Kind of. It highlights this powerful technique, mentally immersing yourself in the subject to get a deeper, more intuitive feel for its spatial relationships.
So it's almost like virtual location scouting before even touching the paper, making sure the composition felt right. That's a brilliant way to think about pre-visualization.
And it wasn't just passive observation either. He actively cultivated his visual library through really focused practice.
Like with the bicycles.
Exactly, like the bicycles. He'd start with subjects he was particularly drawn to. Since he couldn't, say, physically take apart a bike easily, he would just draw them repeatedly, meticulously observing, refining his depiction as his understanding deepened.
So it's that iterative process, constant engagement, refining understanding through the act of drawing itself.
And once he felt he had a solid grasp of one subject, he'd move on to something new, just gradually building this incredibly diverse visual repertoire over time.
He also had this concept he called drawing together, right?
Yeah.
Especially for those complex scenes like a busy park.
Yes. Drawing together. He explained that the figures and the backgrounds were conceived and developed simultaneously, not sequentially.
So not just drawing figures and then plopping them onto a finished background.
Precisely. This simultaneous approach is really key to creating those dynamic, believable scenes where everything feels interconnected and organic.
Right. Otherwise, figures can look a bit pasted on.
This approach demanded constant awareness of tiny details like how is a slide actually constructed, and a deep understanding of the spatial relationships and interactions between all the different elements in the scene.
He even stressed considering unseen elements, like the ground plane, to make sure figures and objects felt properly grounded.
Yeah, making sure everything sits right in the space, even the parts you don't explicitly draw.
Now, as a teacher, Jung Gi had some pretty strong views on foundational skills.
He did. He advised young artists to be cautious about relying too heavily on digital tools too early in their journey.
Comparing it to building a sandcastle.
Yeah, that was his analogy. You might get height, but without a solid base, there are inherent limitations. It raises an important point, doesn't it? About balancing new tech with mastering fundamental techniques.
Definitely.
His emphasis was firmly on getting a deep, accurate understanding of the subject matter through experience and repetition. He stressed studying anatomy for figure drawing,
Of course.
but also cautioned against becoming too stiff, too caught up in rigid rules, finding that balance.
Finding the life in the drawing, not just the technical accuracy. Makes sense. A huge turning point for him in terms of global recognition were those live drawing sessions.
Oh, absolutely. Starting around 2011 at the Busan International Comic Festival, those performances, often filmed and then going viral on YouTube, they were mesmerizing.
What stood out most to you about them? For me, it was just the seeming effortlessness, conjuring these incredibly intricate scenes entirely from memory, live.
Yeah, effortless is the word. Many viewers described it like he was tracing an image that we can't see.
It really did feel like watching magic happen. But, as one of the sources we looked at pointed out, that YouTube deep dive, while it looked like pure innate talent, his command of perspective was actually a skill honed through specific exercises, like using perspective cages.
Exactly. Constructing boxes in space, basically, to understand and manipulate poses in 3 dimensions.
So practical exercises behind the magic.
Right. He and his peers actively use constructive drawing techniques, building complex scenes from basic forms like cubes and cylinders. That systematic foundational approach was the bedrock supporting the seemingly spontaneous fluency.
Which makes his skill feel more attainable, in a way. Even if the level he reached was extraordinary, it came from dedicated practice.
Dedicated practice and a unique way of observing and internalizing.
Sadly, our sources also cover the incredibly sad news of his passing at just 47.
Yeah, really sudden and shocking. He experienced chest pains during an exhibition of his work in Paris just before he was due to travel to New York Comic-Con.
The news came out via CTN News and his social media, confirming he was taken to a hospital.
Right, he tragically passed away. It's hard to believe his career was so rich and varied, too.
It really was. Work in South Korean comics like Young Jump, his own manhwa Tiger the Long Tail, Collaborations in Europe, those DC Comics covers.
And teaching, always teaching and mentoring.
DC publisher Jim Lee called him one of the absolute greats, a fitting tribute.
And his collaborator, Hyun Kim, expressed such deep gratitude for their time working together. He was actually exhibiting and drawing live for fans in Paris right when it happened.
Doing what he loved right up to the end. It's heartbreaking.
Reflecting on everything, Jung Gi's ability to draw without references, that mastery of perspective learned through observation and practice, and his unique mental visualization. It truly set him apart, a generational talent.
Absolutely. And his emphasis on foundational skills, deep observation, immersive visualization, those offer such valuable lessons for any aspiring artist, really, in any field.
His passing leaves a huge void, no question. But his incredible body of work and the insights he shared, they'll continue to inspire and teach for a long, long time.
Kim Jung Gi's journey,
Yeah.
from that kid inspired by manga to this globally celebrated artist. It just powerfully underscores the impact of passion, observation, and just relentless practice.
His self-taught mastery, his unique way of seeing and visualizing, it's a truly compelling case study in artistic development.
So we encourage you, the listener, to think about Kim Jung Gi's methods. What aspects of his approach resonate with you? Is it the constant observation, that cool mini-me idea, the focus on fundamentals? Maybe think about how you could apply some of that immersive visualization to your own learning, whatever you're passionate about.
And you can definitely find more deep dives into the world of art and amazing artists on our Art Deep Dive YouTube channel.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
안녕하십니까, 김정기입니다. 저는 이번에 행사에서 라이브 드로잉을 하고 있습니다. 그래서 제가 얼만큼 자유롭고 재미나는 것들을 그릴 수 있는지 직접 와서 확인해 보시기 바랍니다.